My conversation today is with scholar, author, and content creator Dr. Angela Puca. Dr. Puca hosts the popular and influential YouTube channel for the study of magic, witchcraft, paganism, esotericism, shamanism, and related currents, Angela's Symposium. She also serves as host for Research Network for the Study of Esoteric Practice, or RENCEP's Ask a Practitioner and Ask a Scholar series. Dr. Puca is a university lecturer. Having taught at multiple universities throughout the world, she's been based at Leeds Trinity University since 2016. We sat down for a lively conversation about some of the subjects covered in her latest book, Italian Witchcraft and Shamanism, The Tradition of Segnature, Indigenous and Transcultural Shamanic Traditions in Italy. We also spoke about modern academic scholarship, and we even ventured into a short discussion about what bands she's listening to at the moment. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast.
Andiamo.
I'm here with Dr. Angela Puca. I'm very, very excited to have her on today. Obviously, the head scholar in charge and host of Angela's Symposium YouTube channel, which is extremely popular and influential for the academic study of esotericism. So welcome and thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Ike, for inviting me over. I'm very happy to be here.
So obviously, I've had in the last 2.5 years, I've had a lot of introductory episodes. I think I've only had repeat guests at this point 4 or 5 times. So since it's your first time on the podcast, hopefully one of several conversations that we have, would you be able to sort of explain or introduce how you got started in the path of specifically the academic study of esotericism?
Yes, sure. So, it goes back to when I was a child. Well, yes, but both because of my personal inclination and the fact that I've always been fascinated by magic, and I suppose I've always been fascinated by everything that goes beyond the surface level of reality. I just thought, this idea that you just wake up, eat, work, sleep, and repeat. I don't know, it just felt like there had to be something more, and it felt like there was something more. So I've always been interested in understanding what goes above and beyond the surface level of our daily experience, which also led me to be interested in philosophy. So my bachelor's and my master's were in philosophy because I find it super fascinating, and I still teach philosophy at the university. I teach both philosophy and religious studies at the university here in Leeds. And so it started with this very strong sense of interest and trying to understand what goes beyond, what is there that is beyond, and on all levels, intellectual and spiritual and so on. Now at university, in Italy is not, or it was, and it's still very unlikely. I don't want to say impossible, because there are some universities that nowadays are starting to study and cover these topics. But for the most part, especially when I did university, you couldn't really study magic, and you couldn't study even religious studies. Religious studies is not an option in Italy. Maybe now there are some exceptions, but at the time when I did my university degrees, there wasn't any religious studies program. So if you're interested in religions, what you would do is to do philosophy and then add more exams of religion, because you do have the option of adding exams in history of religion of this culture, for instance. And so I got interested in the Asian side as well. So my degree was on Eastern and Western philosophies. So I got really interested in the in Asian philosophies and religions, and I started studying Sanskrit and Tibetan as well, which I did for 4 years at university. So my first career path in my head was to become a Buddhologist and to work on the primaries, because in Italy, if you want to work on something, you have to know the languages. I know that it's not the same in every country, like especially in English speaking countries, but in Italy, if you want to study something, whether it's Nietzsche or it's the Buddhist canon, you've got to master the language, the original language. So that's how it started. And obviously, given that my main interest has always been magic, I would still gravitate, even within the area, I would still gravitate towards things that had to do more with magic, like yoga and tantra, and so those are the things that that I was gravitating towards. And then during my master's, I also started studying more Renaissance magic. And my master's thesis was on Giovan Battista della Porta, and especially his work on natural magic, Magia Naturalis. So I worked on the Latin text as a part of my master degree thesis, and so that is a part of magic that is studied in Italy, the historical side, especially the Middle Ages, the witches' trials, and Renaissance magic. That is something that is studied, and there are plenty of works on Giordano Bruno, Marsilio Ficino, John Battista della Porta, Gian Battista Vico, and so on. So you do find those studies, but not on the contemporary world. So being born and raised there in Italy, when you're raised in a country and you don't see that something happens, you just think that it's not a thing. So I just thought that the study of contemporary witchcraft was not possible. And then I came across on YouTube on a video by my now friend Jenny Butler. We're actually gonna see the Nine Inch Nails in a couple of months together.
Oh, awesome.
We go to music gigs together now. Just funny because she was so important, in my discovery. Because I came across a YouTube video where she was showcasing her PhD, and she did her PhD on contemporary witchcraft and paganism in Ireland. And so I thought, wow, so it means that it is possible. And I realized that it is something that outside of Italy people would do. So I decided to apply to two universities in the UK with my proposal, with my research proposal, which was on Italian witchcraft and shamanism. And I got in both universities that I applied for. And then I decided to come to Leeds because Leeds also offered me a teaching contract. So when I started my PhD, I also started teaching at university, and I've been teaching ever since. Yeah, it's been a while now.
Wow.
How long it's been? Yeah, I moved here in 2016. So my God, it's almost 9 years.
Good. I mean, you're making a mark then, so at what point did you decide that you wanted to teach outside of academia and begin your channel? It's a little prescient. I've spoken with like Dana Trell has been on the show very recently. He'll be in this season, and I remember his channel being one of the first that I listened to. But like yourself, him, Justin, moving to these spaces was extremely significant and potent in the dissemination and really safe space for people that are interested in learning this stuff. What was your motivation for getting out there?
That's a good question. My motivation was that given that my research was anthropological, I had to do with and deal with practitioners all the time. So I was on the field and participating in rituals and so on. And one thing that really stuck with me as I was doing field work is how completely unaware of the research that was going on in academia practitioners were. So obviously I'm talking about Italy because my fieldwork was in Italy. But when I was speaking with practitioners, they still thought that Mircea Eliade was like the end all be all when it comes to shamanism. It's like there's been like decades of research on shamanism after that, and they literally thought he was the only scholar academic, and the main one. And the same for other fields as well, like in paganism and so on. So I realized, wow, there is such a disconnect between the academic study of these things and the actual practitioners. Like they have zero clue that that there's plenty and plenty of research. And so I felt a sense of responsibility because I thought, you know what, I think this is our fault because from what we can see, and this is something that has been reported also by other colleagues and scholars like Coco von Stuckrad, who in the book The Scientification of Religion, he also talks about this, about the fact that practitioners of magic, historic practitioners, pagans, and so on, are actually very interested and probably even more interested than people in other religious groups in what the science says, in what the academic side says. So it's like we do have evidence that these people are interested in the academic study of this topic. So it is our fault that our research is so it is a bit behind the paywall, and it's also very difficult to find if you don't have an academic affiliation and you know how to search for sources, which is something that you learn when you do a PhD. So it's like we can't expect that everybody needs to have a PhD level knowledge to do research in order to access our scholarship. So I thought, okay, I feel responsible for this, so I want to do something to fix it. And in the final year of my PhD, as I said, I was teaching at uni, and I asked whether I could get a sabbatical from teaching so that I could focus on writing up my thesis. I know that you say dissertation in the US, but in the UK they say thesis for a PhD. And so they said yes. And so I thought, maybe I can sort of channel my teaching energy into a YouTube channel. So I started making videos on things that I was researching for my thesis, but they were not going to end up in my thesis, or some of the bits also that were going to end up in my thesis. So I started making videos based on what I was researching for my PhD, and I turned them into episodes, or either my PhD or my teaching, because also I had the research material for the classes that I was giving at uni. So either it was for my PhD or for the teaching that I was doing. Then I turned them into episodes, and and then I thought, let's see where this leads. But my main objective was to fix this problem of a complete disconnect between academia and the community of practitioners. So to bridge the gap in a way, because it just felt like it's not it's not fair also on practitioners, because they are interested in knowing what we are talking about. And when you go to academic conferences, there are things that have been researched over and over and over, and practitioners have no access to that knowledge. And it's, I don't know, it just felt unfair. So I wanted to democratize that kind of knowledge and also showcase the work of my colleagues, because I don't know if people are aware of this, but all the very hard work that we do to publish peer-reviewed papers is not paid. It is something that we don't get paid for. And when you buy a book that is academic, which means peer-reviewed, or when you buy an article which is peer-reviewed, nothing goes to us. It all goes to the publishers. So I mean, I really feel like there is so much passion from these people, from my colleagues and myself, to do this research in a field that is so difficult to get funding for, that is so difficult to keep doing in universities, and you don't even get paid for all the hard work that you put into a peer-reviewed publication, which takes ages and sweat and blood and tears to get through. And I thought, you know what? I just want to give them attention. It's like I want to showcase the hard work that these incredibly passionate people are doing, because honestly, it does deserve credit. So that was my motivation, and it still is my motivation, to be honest.
Well, and that impulse that has been acted on by a few of you in the academic communities coming to the fore has sort of it's forced practitioners who write and who research to reevaluate their methods and it's now everybody is getting kind of held to a higher standard, which I think is, and we're holding ourselves to a higher standard, which I think is super important. So I want to talk a little bit about the book that you released last year, but before I do that, I have a selfish question. As somebody who's a YouTuber and very well positioned in terms of bridging the academic and practitioner communities, especially now, you're moderating and hosting Renceps online, sort of interviews, ask a practitioner, ask a scholar. Um, and selfishly, for me, I have this impulse to ask you, where do you find joy in after doing it for years, the podcasting and the content production? I'm just interested, where do you derive the most joy in that endeavor now, years later?
You mean in which specific activity?
Being sort of an online content producer, interviewer, things like that. What part of that is still the most fulfilling to you? Whether it's, is it still the research? Is it the? I'm sure it's not the editing of the videos.
No,
I hate that.
that I can tell.
And or just interacting with people. I don't know. It's again, it's a selfish question, but I'm interested.
I think that overall, I would say that I still derive joy from everything, but there are some things that are more joyful than others for me. I think definitely the research side and the community side would
Mm,
be like on the top, like doing the research for a video and spending all the time reading the papers that are out there and the creative process of thinking how to put them together in in a script that then becomes the script of my videos. That's that alongside the community, those are the two things that I derive the most joy from. Whereas the thing that I derive the least amount of joy from are things that have to do with editing editing videos, and um, what else? Being in front of a camera.
really?
Yeah, I know that a
Huh.
lot of people assume that I love being in front of the camera. I don't know why, but it's a general assumption that people have of me, and it's not true. Actually, I always have to say, okay, I have to find a day where I'm in the right mindset where I can be in front of the camera. I don't find it particularly pleasant to be in front of a camera.
Mm,
So, but I love the community that it has created, both with my patrons, which are the ones that I have the most relationship with, especially the ones that have like a one-to-one conversation with me, because over time, especially when they stick around, you sort of create even a friendship. And also the community of us creators, the religion tube, as we call us. So
mm,
we also have like a private group and talk about things. So it's nice to have a community. So I think the human side is always the one that that I value the most,
mm,
because as others also say very often, this can be quite an isolating job because you are in front of a camera and it's, you have to imagine that there are people, but it's actually just you in front of a camera and you in front of a screen editing. But then when you get to interact with people like with you now, or with with my community, then it feels real and it feels like, it's getting across and people feel something about it. So I also love when I've gone to for instance, at the Witch Fest or at conferences, and people recognize me and want to take selfies with me. And
mm,
I don't know, I find, there's part of me that is surprised and obviously very honored and flattered. And then I
mm.
thought, oh, it's so nice that there are people that, there are actual people that watch my channel. It's not a number that I see on the
Right.
YouTube studio. It's, those are actual people. So when you get to not just see the numbers, but you get to see the people, the souls that your work has impacted, then that is the most rewarding feeling. Or sometimes I've got letters, for instance, of people saying that, or emails of people telling me that they started a master's or a bachelor's in anthropology of religion or in religious studies because of my YouTube channel. That was incredible. Or when I went to give a lecture at Harvard University, and all the students there were super fan of my channel, and they said, "Oh, I joined Harvard because of you." Because
Oh, wow.
I was wow.
Yeah.
So it was incredible to see that. So that seeing the impact that you have is the most rewarding thing, and the community, because I mean I'm a people person. I think that it's nice to read books and to get the knowledge, but I like the connection. I like to feel that it's worth for other people.
Mm. That's great. That's excellent. Beautifully put. So you published a book last year, Italian Witchcraft and Shamanism: The Tradition of Segnature, Indigenous and Transcultural Shamanic Traditions in Italy.
Yeah, it's this one. I also co-edited another volume. These are both academic books. Even though now I'm starting, as I told you before the interview, I'm starting to work with commercial publishers too. But both of these are academic books. Um, One with Brill, and this was co-edited with Susan Owen, Pagan Religion in 5 minutes. I don't know if it's readable.
Yeah. I saw that. I think I saw that on Amazon actually.
Yeah, this is an edited volume, which means that there are different chapters written by different contributors who are all academics in the field from different parts of the world. We try to be as balanced as we could. Whereas this one is a monography, as I don't know if the term is known outside of academia, but it means a book that you have written yourself, and that's it.
Mm.
So yeah, this is based on my PhD research, and actually the image on the cover I've made it myself,
Oh wow.
and this horn that you see here,
Uh,
it's my horn. I mean, I have it in my other room, and it's I took a picture, and then I removed the background, and then I put it.
yeah. That's great.
I wanted an
Personalized.
image that, yeah, I wanted an image that sort of conveyed the sense of what I was going to talk about, because these two are connected to Italian folk magic, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is a drum, and it sort of gives you the sense of shamanism and also the transcultural side, not just the indigenous side. And this is kind of a hand that is reaching um, towards it. So yeah, I thought it was appropriate to create my own image for the cover.
And I think what's really interesting to me in particular about this work is that you're focusing on what, at least for us in the States, in terms of the popular um, areas of investigation is quite underserved, and I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that you have a cultural connection to in some way to the tradition. Um, and as you mentioned, you extensively covered the Italian tradition of witchcraft for your doctorate, but you also systematized the vernacular magic tradition as segnature, right? Can you?
You're very good with pronunciations, you know?
Well, I grew
I've
up in a
not.
European household. Like my mother's
Okay.
family, like I was telling you, is from Sicily, and my father's from Greece. So,
Yeah, because I noticed even before, because I studied ancient Greek and Latin growing up, and I noticed that your pronunciation of Greek is also excellent. So I thought, oh, that's new, because
thanks. Yeah, it's one of actually, believe it or not, I try when I was growing up, I tried not to speak around my cousins because I was embarrassed of my accent. But thank you very much. I
I think
appreciate that.
accent is one thing and pronunciation is another.
Yeah.
I think we all have an accent, whether it's a native accent, regional accent, or a foreign accent. Everybody has an accent. There's a very big difference between getting a pronunciation wrong and having an accent, but pronouncing things right.
Right. Yeah, that's actually an astute observation. But can you explain for some of the listeners what exactly segnatore means? Because it's probably a new term for a lot of them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it also has the GN that most English speakers can't pronounce. But unfortunately, there is so it was. It's not probably the most English friendly term to pronounce and remember, but it is the most significant in the tradition. So I couldn't choose another one. Um, so basically, segnature is plural and segnatura is singular. So in case I say both things. So it's pretty much the core of the practice of Italian witchcraft across different regions. Now, it's possible that your speaking viewers might be familiar with books written in English on Italian witchcraft, and all the ones that I'm aware of are incorrect when it comes to defining Italian witchcraft. And in fact, my work was the very first academic work in English on Italian witchcraft. There isn't any other work that covers the whole of Italy in English and academic. So and the reason is not that I'm a genius, and I was like, oh, because I'm a genius, I'm the first one to think to do the systematic study of Italian witchcraft. It's because Italian witchcraft as a whole is relatively new. So the scholars that came before me and worked on, for instance, magic in the south, like Ernesto De Martino, or magic in specific regional areas of Italy. They did it for a reason, and that's because we didn't really have a unified Italian witchcraft, if not until recently. And there are a few reasons for that. First of all, Italy is quite a young country because, it's from 1865. And for a long time, even after the unification of Italy, there was a lot of separation between the different regions. That's why so many Italian Americans that had parents that come from the Second World War time, they would sometimes not even speak Italian. They would speak like a regional dialect, and they would define themselves as Sicilians as opposed to Italian, because I think at the time, people were still much more connected to the regional area that they were in, and they wouldn't really speak the national language as much. Now things are different, and thanks to social media, people have become more, there's been more of a unification even on a cultural level. So now the whole of Italy speaks Italian, of course, and Italian is a very specific and distinctive culture. And even though there are regional variations, but there's also something like a strong national identity for Italians. Now, this has also translated, thanks to social media, into the exchange between different witchcraft traditions and practices, and also becoming aware of them. Because one thing that has happened with folk Italian witchcraft is that it was quite concealed. It was an underground tradition. I've published that in a peer-reviewed journal, calling it an underground folk magic tradition, because it's one of those things that everybody knew about, but nobody would openly speak about it. It's sort of a secret hidden in plain sight. So it's like if you entered like a town, you wouldn't know that there is a town magician or a town shaman. But if you know people that know this person, then everybody will know about it. So an example that I can give you is that when I published my first video on my YouTube channel on the tradition of segnature, I got a lot of messages and emails from Italians saying, "Oh, really? This is happening the whole of Italy. I thought it was just my town." So the "I thought it was just my town" was the most recurring comment that I got from my informants throughout my PhD. So most people would think that it was just an oddity of their own town, that they had this town healer. But then, thanks to the internet, they started to communicate, and they started to have groups on Facebook. And so they realized that actually in Sicily and in Emilia-Romagna, they were doing similar things. And in Piemonte and in Campania, they were also doing very similar things. Yeah, there were some variations, but the body of the practice was the same. And the body of that practice is the segnatura, which is a mixture of gesture and words that are used for a specific effect, for a specific magical effect. It's often a form of healing, but it can also be done for other magical purposes, like for I don't know, to cast and remove the malocchio is a common one in southern Italy. But for many things, there's a ritual that there's a practice with the segnature that is very similar to the shamanic soul retrieval, but it's called, can I translate it? Like the herbal fear. So it's there's the idea that if you have a strong fear for a traumatic event, there's part of you that leaves you. So there's this segnatura that sort of brings you back into a whole, into being whole again. So it's very similar to a soul retrieval ritual. And there are also some segnature that are meant to affect the weather. For instance, there was this Sicilian Segnatrice, this folk witch that used to count down the, she would call it like the swirling of the sea when people were, were coming closer to the I forgot how to say English now. Yeah, when
Harbor
people
or
were landing.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
when people were landing. So yeah, it's so that is what the segnatura is, and the reason why I decided to call Italian witchcraft systematized as a whole as the tradition of segnature, it's because it's the only term that really describes what this practice is in its entirety, and because this is the core of the practice that you find across all the regions, and because the practitioners themselves are starting to call it like that because segnatura or segnature, plural, comes from the region Emilia-Romagna. But thanks to the internet and the fact that people really lack the term to define this specific practice, they started using segnature even in other regions. So I sort of detected a trend and also realized that it was the most informative way to describe this practice, and that's why I chose that. But yeah, the segnatura is the core practice that you find across different regions.
And so, I think a more well-known term right now among the mainstream that is kind of been, I don't want to say debunked, but revealed for, being more of a modern practice would be what stregheria. That's what I think a lot of people when they not that a lot of people are into it, but I do know some practitioners who have an Italian background that I see that come up quite a bit, and I think some of your work has been to show that that's a little bit more of a modern thing, and is there a relation there to modern currents via Wicca and things like that? Is it separate or does it fall under the segnature bracket?
So the problem with stregheria, which by the way is not even an Italian term, is not whether it's modern or not. Because to a degree, even Italian folk magic traditions are modern in a sense because they keep evolving. The problem is that they are not Italian and they are sold as Italian, but there's nothing Italian about it. It's the pepperoni pizza of you know I've there are people that come to Italy and ask for a pepperoni pizza. You'd be very disappointed by what you would get in Italy because a pepperoni is another thing in Italy. And anyway, so the way that I would describe stregheria, and I have a dedicated video on my YouTube channel if people want to dive deeper into that, and you will also find the sources in the info box, is that it's an American tradition. It's an American tradition created by and for people with Italian heritage that wanted to reconnect with said Italian heritage. Now, the tradition itself has nothing of Italian. There's nothing Italian about it, nothing that resembles anything that I've ever seen in actual Italy, being born and raised there. But I think that was meant to help people with Italian heritage to reconnect with it. Now, this is not a problem per se, because if people find the practice useful to reconnect with their Italian heritage, I'm no one to say anything against it. What I do have a problem with is the false statement and that it is authentic Italian witchcraft. And I have personally witnessed Raven Grimassi arguing with actual Italians. I mean, actual Italians born and raised in Italy who actually could speak Italian because he couldn't. And he was getting angry with them because they were telling him that what he was talking about was not really happening in Italy. And he said that it wasn't true. I've witnessed this with my eyes. So I don't have a particular respect for this person because of the sheer arrogance that he had as an American, just trying to to portray his Wiccan-based American tradition with some Italian spice on it, to say, oh, this is the authentic Italian witchcraft. What? I mean, there wasn't even anything such as Italian witchcraft at the time when he was writing the book, because as I said, there was a prevalence of regional variations and there was really a unified sense of the practice. So yeah, that gets me angry, but I'm also respectful of the practitioners that find the practice useful. So I want to convey the sense that Even though I have zero respect for Reverend Grimassi, and because I have evidence that he just wanted to falsely state things that were not correct. And even when he was presented with people saying this is not correct, he would just ignore them and even talk over them. Despite the fact that I don't have respect for the person who created the tradition, I can have respect for the people that follow it, insofar as what they're trying to do is just to reconnect with their heritage, really. And up until recently, you didn't really have in the English language nothing particularly that would help an English speaking person to have a sense of what Italian witchcraft was. So I sympathize with Italian Americans who use the practice to reconnect with their heritage, but I would also want to remind them that that is not Italian witchcraft.
Well, that's well put, and I'm glad that you got to say that. The title of your book dealing with more terms that I think are a little bit obscure to mainstream or enthusiasts or practitioners, things like the differentiation between indigenous and transcultural shamanism. So how are you defining shamanism in the context of your work here? Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is the more academic-y side of the. So hopefully your audience will not be put too bored. So in academia, obviously, it's very important to define terms, and one of the thesis that I put forth in my book and in my PhD is that the Italian folk magic tradition of the Segnature is a form of indigenous shamanism. But obviously, that requires me to explain what I mean when I use the term indigenous and when I use the term shaman. So we can start with the indigenous side. And again, for this, I have dedicated videos on my YouTube channel if people want to go more into details and they want the sources, because all my videos have the sources in the info box. So, when it comes to indigenous religions, and this is something that I wasn't the first one to say, there are other scholars such as Susan Owen, Graham Harvey, and many others, and James Cox, that have talked about the concept of indigenous religions. Now, indigenous religions is not the same as indigenous people. Indigenous people is a political category, and it has a specific meaning that is specific to certain countries in particular, where there has been a mass immigration to the point where the settlers had to cohabitate with the native people of the country. So this is something that applies to specific countries in the world. And even though many other countries have had flux of immigrations and different forms of colonization over the centuries, is not the same as a mass colonization pretty much all at once, where the settlers and the native get to live together and one becomes the minority. So the status of indigenous people is a political status that is that hopefully helps to help this minority. Indigenous religion is a different category that can or cannot overlap with indigenous people. So there are indigenous people that might practice indigenous religions, and there are indigenous people that might practice Christianity. Obviously, you cannot combine the two, because what if you find an indigenous person who's a Catholic? Does it make Catholicism an indigenous religion? Of course not. So, and also, I think that it's important to disentangle the two, because otherwise we risk something that has happened over and over again with indigenous people, which is exoticizing them and exoticizing certain practices, and not seeing that there are certain practices that are not part of the exotic other, but that we also have in front of us in our neighborhood. But if you exoticize a practice and you connect it to certain people, that damages the people because of the sense of exoticization, and it is unhelpful for you to understand the practice itself, because you cannot understand what it is in itself, and you attach it to specific people. So what what an indigenous religion is a religion that is rooted in a specific country, in a specific culture, that is based on kinship relations, that is very rooted in a territory and in a specific culture. So we've had a long wave of practices in Western Exoticism, but also more generally, where there is a sense of universalization, and that would be what the transcultural is, right? So with a transcultural religion or a transcultural practice, you have a specific ritual, and whether you practice it in Italy or in the US or in the UK, you're supposed to get the same exact results. So what you learn is a technique. And also, obviously, is a technique that can be a theurgic technique as well as a practical magical technique. But it is a universalized and universalizable technique where it's not rooted to a specific territory, it's not rooted to a specific culture. You can do it there and I can do it here, and we are supposed to have similar results. Whereas with an indigenous practice, it is connected to the place. So you cannot do it in another place and expect the same results, because it's connected to the spirits of the land and it is connected to the land. And as well as the fact that very often there is another element of indigenous religions is the fact that the transmission of knowledge is done orally. And it's not the oral part that is particularly cogent here. The part that is most important is the fact that it's not standardized. So when you have an oral transmission of knowledge, it's not a standardized knowledge. It's not like when you write a book and anybody can read it and it's all nice and structured in a specific way, and 1,000 people will read it in the same way. If I transmit my knowledge orally, if I say something to you, even in an interview, and tomorrow I have a similar interview with somebody else, I'll probably say different things, because the way that I speak with you is not it doesn't just have to do with what I want to say, but also with my interaction with you. So depending on the person that I have in front of me, I might say things that are different even when I'm asked the same question. And the same happens with the oral transmission of knowledge, which could be better described in this sense as a non-standardized transmission of knowledge, a form of knowledge that is culturally based but also individually based. This is another characteristic of indigenous religions. And as for the term shamanism, shamanism is a difficult term to define because, and there is no agreed upon label in academia. So the way that I went around it to try and explain how I was using the term shamanism, I used two methodologies as part of my research in defining shamanism. The first methodology is a deictic approach. A deictic approach comes from the Latin deixis, and deixis refers to terms that don't have an inherent meaning, but they acquire meaning in context. So, for instance, here and there are deictic terms. So it's if I say here, you always understand what I'm talking about. But what it actually means depends on the context. And the same for there. So these are deictic terms. And I argue in my research that shamanism is also a deictic terms. And that's why it's so difficult to pinpoint by different scholars, because depending on the context, it manifests in different ways. There are some contexts where the trance is essential and other contexts where the trance is less essential. Now, alongside the deictic approach, I also use discourse analysis, which is a methodology of Foucauldian origin. And discourse analysis is analyzing the pattern of meanings that derive from the community of practitioners. Now, one of the difficulties that people who study contemporary esotericism, paganism, and so on find is that when you ask to 11 practitioners, you will get 20 answers. This is the typical thing that every scholar says, right? Now, there are some scholars, but few, I would say, they would say, oh, so this thing cannot be defined because, there are too many different variations on the definition. But actually, as social science teaches us, even though the individuals might define things differently, when you have enough data, when you have a lot of data on the definitions that people give of something, you will find that even though the words are different, you find patterns of meaning that repeat over and over and over. So if you have enough data, you can analyze it to abstract what's the pattern of meaning. So there are common denominators. And so this is the other method that I use in my definition of shamanism. So my definition of shamanism in Italian context clearly is contextual because it is based on this deictic approach that I defined, alongside discourse analysis of that emerged from the community of practitioners that I researched. So I hope that wasn't too academic, but
No, I mean that personally, I find that fascinating. So I think I have a feeling that a lot of the listeners are going to as well, just particularly because it's usually a nice balance of people that are interested in the academic perspective, but like you said, do not have access to it. So uh you mentioned a little bit about how healing was connected to the group of techniques, I guess, in the Segnature. And we also talk a little bit about the dependence on spirits of the land. And, one of the things that I find in shamanism is, particularly in the studies of in particular, what we might call the pre-Socratic Greek shamanic tradition, which had a presence, as far as we can tell, in Magna Graecia and that whole area in mainland Italy. That magic and healing at this point really were almost inextricably bonded. Is that true in what we're referring to as traditional Italian witchcraft? Does it is its telos more of a healing art, a medical art, or is it, is there a side of it that's like strictly mundane, like, oh, I need a job, type of thing?
so are you asking whether Italian witchcraft is more about daily problems or about connection with the divine?
Yeah, and really, like, is there a medical component to it? Are they is that form of maybe indigenous shamanism based in a needing to heal, like physical ailments, or we talked a little bit about this soul retrieval. I think you call it herbal fear. That's very cool for me. But is there any evidence that these early shamans were like doctors before medicine was systematized?
Oh, so when I talk about Italian shamanism and Italian witchcraft, I talk about contemporary world. We don't
Mhm.
really have any documents to suggest that these practices go back. It is possible. It's not something that I can exclude, but I can also not affirm it because we don't have the documentation to say this practice is this many centuries long.
Mm.
The thing that I have evidence for is that similar practices are found in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So, what would be interesting to trace if we had the resources to do like a pan-European research on the practice of segnature, it would be interesting to see whether there's a specific origin of this practice, like a specific country from which they stem, and what are the countries specifically that have similar practices. Because given that I have presented my research at several international conferences, I've definitely had researchers coming to me and saying, this is happening also in Moldova. This is happening, very similar practices to what you're describing are happening in Switzerland. Similar practices are happening in certain areas of France. So I've had different researchers approaching me and saying these are happening in different parts. And it seems to be particularly Central and Eastern Europe. But I don't know exactly because I only have these anecdotal evidence from colleagues. And in terms of the type of magic, I'd say that most of this magic is about resolving problems in daily life. So it is about resolving illnesses that conventional medicine cannot do anything about. Um, and if the funny thing is that there are even certain towns in Italy where hospitals would send you to the segnatore or the segnatrice, which is very bizarre. And in some cases, they also have a good relationship with the town church. For instance, in other cases, there's a conflict with because officially, obviously, the Catholic Church doesn't allow you to practice witchcraft for any reason. But in reality, what happens in reality is that there are some priests that are more lenient towards these kind of practices and even work with these folk magic witches. So yeah, but I'd say most of it is most of the practice is about healing, resolving problems in the daily life, finding a job, resolving anxieties. Um, yeah, I'd say, or casting the evil eye. So it is really about resolving things in people's lives. Although the result is also that it bonds the community, I suppose, because there is also a communal element.
And how much do we know in terms of the historical record, or what is maybe visible or ascertainable from an anthropological standpoint, that kind of analysis? Does this indigenous sort of witchcraft tradition have any crossover or interaction with what somebody like David Pantano would call the Italic Hermetic tradition? Is it influenced by any of the stuff that, let's say, Lazzarelli or Correggio was doing, the magical philosophies of some of the philosophers that you mentioned earlier, Giordano Bruno, Della Porta, Marsilio Ficino? Is there anywhere that we see these kind of influences in that tradition?
Not really. I've always been interested in seeing whether there is any meaningful correlation between segnature and the doctrine of the signature by
Signature.
Paracelsus. But just because we don't even know where the term signature comes from, what is the historical derivation? How did it come to be associated with that practice? And I'd say that all those Hermeticists and magicians from the Renaissance were more highly educated and more inclined towards theurgical types of magic. And the folk magic that I have researched is more of people that very often were not learned at all. So this seems to be something that you find in other countries too. Like even in the UK, you have a difference between learned magic and cunning folk. And very often, folk magic is not particularly connected with the more ceremonial, more learned, perhaps more theologically inclined type of magic. So I don't really have evidence of that. But as I said, there isn't research on that. So it could also be the case that if I had the chance and the funding to do more research, I might find some connection. But for the time being, I don't have any evidence to support it.
Yeah, one of the things that I found kind of interesting too was this, and I mentioned it to you briefly before the interview, is this pre-Socratic shamanic tradition that people like Peter Kingsley and P.D. Newman have talked about, and a lot of it, or at least the Parmenidean tradition coming from Elia, which was in mainland Italy, in the I believe the Campania region. I mean, you can double check me on that and get back, but I'm pretty sure it was there. They found in the '60s in an area called Castellammare della Bruca,
Mm.
which is, I think, in southwest Italy. They found a marble inscription that talks a little bit about Parmenides, and we know it was likely the same Parmenides because of this kind of irregularity in the spelling of the name. And there are titles, epithets applied to him, like Yatromantis, which is kind of like a shaman, and Polarkos, which means like Lord of the Cave or Lord of the Lair. And Peter Kingsley and Dr. Peter Young have speculated. I find it a fascinating sort of trajectory of investigation that he was practicing there. He was actually sort of a leader in a community that may have been practicing incubatory techniques of healing that are, you know, very much, I would say, you know, closer to this shamanic thing that we're talking about. Although, you know, I concede it is a difficult term to apply to things, but I would say that that's less theurgic than it is something like, you know, shamanic, or it reminds me of certain indigenous traditions you even read about here in the United States from the Native Americans. So I've always found that fascinating, that there's that kind of connection there, that pre-theurgic connection that supposedly, you know, was present in Italy at we're probably looking at what, the 5th century BCE.
Yeah, 5th century BC. And yeah, I was checking, and it is Elia would be the contemporary city of Ascea, which is in the province of Salerno in southern Campania, which is also the region I come from, in case people don't know.
Oh wow. Very
It's not
cool.
Salerno, I come from Napoli, but the region is Campania.
Yeah, I went to Napoli once. I liked it very much. I had some pastry, and then I went to Pompeii, which was fascinating. So I'm curious, and this is a little bit more of a personal question. What is your, and you can tell me, you know, that's not something that you don't really discuss publicly, but what is your overarching worldview in all of this? Do you have a practice that is related to these traditions, or were you in close proximity to practitioners of this kind of stuff, these traditions at any point in your development?
So I don't normally answer questions about my personal beliefs and practices. So it's something that I will have to leave unanswered. But I can say that as given that my type of research is anthropological, I continuously have to participate in rituals and undertake initiations um, and really participate actively in all sorts of magical rituals, even just as part of my research. And it's interesting because it reminds me that I was once in this shamanic retreat. And obviously, when you are there as a researcher, you always have to say it because otherwise your data will be invalidated. We need to go through a whole ethical approval with the university. So you always have to say that you're there as a researcher. And there was somebody at the retreat who, interestingly, was a medical doctor who said, so to the shaman, to the teacher, he said, I know that we are being observed today. And she replied, there are no observers, only participants. And then she said, Angela, come here. And I was always the first one to do every single ritual and every single practice that
Wow.
she she taught during those days. So yeah,
What a
that,
perk. What a perk of the job. That's awesome. Um, so I've just got a couple more questions. How does the, or did the folk tradition in Italy interface with something like Catholicism, right? An institution. Um, was there a kind of political adversity there between the two, or did people seem to kind of organically blend both of them? How did that? What did that look like, or what does that look like?
it's difficult because I also have a chapter in my book about the relationship and contrast with the Catholic Church, and I remember that when I started my field work on that, I I kind of assumed that it would be there would be just contrast. You know, it was just something that was frowned upon and forbidden, and it's not that simple actually, because you know, with the Pope Francesco, for instance, Francis. There's also the fact that he welcomed some people from some indigenous people, and there was the Pan Synodic event a few years ago, where there were indigenous people bringing in figurines of the Pachamama, which is something that made the news into the Vatican. It's complicated because from a theological point of view, Catholicism doesn't accept forms of magic. So the official theological stance is that of contrast. But in reality, it really depends because many of the Italian witches, especially of the old generation, were strongly Catholic, and they would see their magic practice as part of their Catholicism. They wouldn't see it as different. They would see it as part of their Catholic practice, and they wouldn't call themselves witches, and they would really get angry at me if I would, if they knew that I would call them witches. Um, so it's because of the fact that the term witch has such a history of antagonism with the Catholic Church. So yeah, and then you have like some churches with the priests that are lenient towards these practitioners and would even work with them. There are some of these segnatori that when because segnatori don't get paid for what they do. Everything that they do is for free. So when there are some that would accept donations, but others they wouldn't even accept donations. So often people, as a thank you, they would give them, for instance, fruit, vegetables, foods, and they would bring it to. There are some of them that told me that they would just bring it to the church to give it to poor people. So yeah, there are also churches that have clearly a relationship with these local healers. I don't think that they would call them witches, but this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have the emic and the ethic perspective because practitioners are notoriously bad at defining their practices. And by bad, I mean inaccurate. I shouldn't have said bad. But yeah, what I mean is that practitioners, when they define what they do, they don't have in mind to be as accurate as they can, which is the scope of academics. What they have in mind is to convey to whomever they have in front the message they want to give. So they might use completely different terms just because of what they want to convey about their practice. So, which is legitimate. It's not, there's nothing wrong about it, but it just highlights the fact that it is important to have the academic perspective to have an accurate definition of things.
Absolutely. So, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about anything that you have forthcoming that you might want to mention, whether that's stuff with the channel or otherwise.
So I definitely hope that everybody watching will sign up to my YouTube channel, Angela Symposium. And if you want to support my work, the best way is joining my Patreon and also checking out my services on my website at drangelapuca.com. I have online courses. You can have tutoring sessions with me. There's lots of stuff, so check drangelapuca.com. You can also sign up for my newsletter. And I have an upcoming book with Wiser on the left-hand path, which hopefully will come up next year. And I'm planning on publishing more books. So it's something that I feel strongly about, that I really want to publish more books and hopefully keep going with my work, both in academia and outside of it. Like next week, I'm going to King's College in London to teach, and in May, I'm going to the University of Rome to give lectures. And last month, I was at the University of Exeter to teach on their masters in magic and occult science. It's the only master's degree in the UK on magic. So if you are in the UK and are interested in doing a master's degree specifically on magic and occult science, the UK is a good place to do that in Exeter or in Amsterdam. Obviously, Amsterdam is famous for that.
So at the end of our conversation, I give everybody a canned question, and that is for listeners today to our conversation that are interested in learning more about traditional Italian witchcraft, indigenous shamanism, or even I would say, the sort of methodological approaches that academics are using. Could you recommend 3 books to our listeners today?
3 books on methodology. Oh,
Or just traditional witchcraft, anything. I want to sort of broaden it up because this question always catches people off guard a little bit. So
yeah.
to broaden it a little bit, or you could keep it hyper specific. What are some of the works that you cite or look to reliably in your own studies? You can also list your own works. So
Yeah, so if people are interested in Italian witchcraft, I would say mine. Maybe get it via library because it's expensive and it's not my fault. So you can blame academic publishers for that. But that would be an option. And you should be able to get it via academic libraries, hopefully, and in other places if you know where to search. And another book that I would recommend is Roland Hatton, The Triumph of the Moon. I just find myself going back to that book because I really like it a lot, and it is on contemporary paganism, especially in the UK. And let me think. It's a difficult question, because there are so many books that I really like. Um, Maybe Wouter Hanegraaff, his works, also The Scientification of Religion by Coco von Stuckrad, if you're interested in the
mm,
interception, in the intermingling of science and magic, and Wouter Hanegraaff's work on Hermeticism, if you're interested in Hermeticism. Um, and also there's an encyclopedia on Gnosis. I think that one is also, that could be a good general a good general work, academic work that covers everything. But now I can't remember the exact term, but I've studied it a lot on my YouTube channel. Um, yeah,
yeah.
anyway.
That's great. That's a great list. I'm actually probably going to be a little unfair to you and hit you with another 3 questions because I heard you mention night you guys were going to see Nine Inch Nails. What are like 3 albums you're listening to right now, or 3 bands that you're listening to?
Um, at the moment, I'm listening to The Birthday Massacre, which is another band that Jenny and I are going to see. And it's gonna be a great way to spend Samhain because it will be the
Oh
first
wow,
of November.
great.
So I really like The Birthday Massacre. I also like In This Moment.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
And the band that used to be my favorite was Nightwish. I listen to them less these days, but I really like symphonic gothic metal.
Hmm.
And I used to sing them as well because I'm also a singer, metal
Oh,
singer. Yeah, I'm trained operatic, so I'm a soprano. So I've been both in music bands where I would sing things like Iron Maiden and Megadeth, and bands where I would sing Nightwish, where the voice is operatic and then the bass is very strong, like the typical metal instrumental bass. So yeah, these are the bands that I tend to gravitate towards.
great. Well, thank you for granting me your recommendations or what you're listening to. That stuff's always fascinating to me too. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm looking forward to everything that you've got coming up for us. And again, thank you so much for coming on. All of Dr. Puka's links are in the description of this video, so definitely check out her channel if you haven't already, and support her works.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I hope that people enjoyed it.